Hi, Lisa. Good to see
Hello,
you.
Vin. Good to see
Well,
you as well.
thank you. Well, we've got a heck of a topic for our program today, additive manufacturing, which I maintain has taken spinal implant manufacturing by storm. Uh, in my mind, there's been an explosion of really remarkable designs. A lot of creativity has been unleashed. And as well as creativity, by the way, there have been lawsuits about these designs. So incredibly, this whole area of additive manufacturing is really moving in some really interesting directions. It's migrating because of the designs, it's migrating from interbody implants to SI joint implants to even foot, ankle, hand, and wrist. It's just crazy what's going on. So I'm hoping today that we're going to tackle this huge and really timely subject because we got a lot of questions, that's for sure. Tackle this subject. And why don't we kick this off, Lisa, by kind of going back and just give a little background, short, quick background on additive manufacturing.
Would love to. Thank you. It's such an exciting technology, but you brought up some incredible points with respect to now that we're well, we're certainly further along in AM and our knowledge, lessons learned, and hopefully we'll address a lot of that today as well. If not, we're going to need a part two. Bring your questions in. It'll be fun because there's so much to go over and so much to learn. But we all know that additive manufacturing, it's nicknamed 3D printing. It's the process of joining materials to make objects from 3D CAD models, software design of these models, where we build layer upon layer onto the substrates. And currently, when we're building titanium implants or printing titanium implants, for instance, it's a powdered titanium and it's built on a layered system from these parasolid files that are sent to the machine. What I loved about it when it first came out, it was so exciting because it was that next generation of implants in our minds, because we could create these complex matrices with open structures, repeatable porous structures, as well as roughened surfaces and lightweight components. The aircraft industry has been using it for decades, where they can get the strength, but also the decreased weight, obviously, which is necessary for airplanes, for instance. And you can get much greater surface areas for sharing things like cellular spread, but in the aircraft industry, you get it for heat exchange, for example, where you've got microstructures that are incredibly efficient, have significantly large surface areas for that heat exchange and greater stress distribution when we talk about implants, for instance. And that's what I have for the introduction. We
Well,
can talk about the
and of course,
benefits.
yeah, but all of the before we get into the benefits, but all of those attributes, the more surface area, the more opening up for space. While in the aircraft industry, it has, certain functionality. The manufacturers have now taken these arguments, hey, so much more space, so much more open area. Therefore, these features deliver benefits. So first of all, what are kind of, you've been using these for a while. What benefits have kind of percolated up as the main benefits behind these new designs?
Well, there's a lot of benefits. The main benefit is we can create these structures that are open. Why is that important when you think about medical devices, especially in orthopedics and spine? Because these porosities allow for bone ingrowth. You can anchor implants through osseointegration. Now, others can say, yeah, but we've been doing that for a while. Well, you've got a single open pore in the conventional cages. Now you're saying, I can get a material with strength like titanium, and I can put large open structures into it. I can create repeatable structures, which cells like, and I can have bone grow into it from multiple directions, not just a single core, for instance, in the spine and interbody devices where you've got one direction of bone growth. Here now you're coming in from multiple regions of entry into that implant. So you can get earlier osseointegration potentially around the surface into the superficial porosities, for lack of a better term, or open structures of that implant, get better stabilization because you're reducing that micro motion, even if it's just within a few microns of bone growth into that implant, so that it continues that process where you're recruiting more bone into the implant, et cetera. It grows deeper into it, and eventually you get fusion.
And you get these different designs, like a strut design, or you have these new curves coming out. Certainly, curve is so famous for load bearing. Curves are essential in all architecture. You know, they can handle the loads better. So, in terms of the benefits, do you think we're seeing better load bearing, for example?
I think we are, and we're going to get into this later too. What I really like about it is that you can create graded structures. You can have a much greater open porosity at the surface, but you can gradually make it denser towards the center for better structural support. I call it tuning. So you'll always hear me talk about tuning that structure. I developed a protective gear, a helmet too, where I use a structure that I can program certain areas that I want to break at a specific force. So, you give it a threshold, obviously, and I can say, all right, I want this structure to be of this design. For instance, the lattice, I need this much support. It has to resist this load. Let's put a margin on that, and let's design it so that for this region, it'll resist this much load. But for a different region, I need less resistance. And that's the beauty about the additive manufacturing, where you can design it so that you can have these graded structures. It doesn't have to be all one uniform structure.
So if I'm a manufacturer, or even I suppose if I'm a surgeon, but certainly if I'm a manufacturer and I've been making, implants sort of from bar stock all these years, doing the subtractive manufacturing rather than additive manufacturing, which is additive is kind of like building from the ground up, right?
Correct.
Subtractive, you're taking stuff away. So if I'm the manufacturer and I'm thinking about servicing my surgeon customer, what do I have an algorithm I use to help me figure out whether I'm going to go away from my subtractive approach to the additive approach? How does that work?
Well, first I'm going to caution you that as additive manufacturing has been advancing in the technology for medical devices, conventional manufacturing hasn't gone away. It's growing with AM. And why is that? Well, because we still post-process our devices. After printing them, we still have to post-process them, get rid of the burrs, et cetera. And there's other post-processing methods that need to be done, like hipping for strength, et cetera. That still requires conventional machining processes. So it's growing with it as well. I think that you have to ask yourself, is conventional machining or additive better? What's the process? What's the specific market need that I need to address here? And does the 100+ years of conventional machining not allow us to create these structures to answer and address that specific need? Do we need a new emerging technology such as AM to do that? And can AM unlock this new paradigm to address it? Can it lead us down a path, which it has in many ways, to develop implants that are what I call certainly the next generation, where we can create these open structures. Now we can tailor these structures or tune these structures for specific tissues as well.
No,
So
it's yeah, no, absolutely. I've tracked the pace of innovation in spinal implants for a long, long time. And frankly, innovation pretty much peaked about 5, 6 years ago, maybe 8 years ago,
Yes,
except in this area. In this area, innovation is exploding everywhere. And now that you've kind of opened up the freedom to work in 3 dimensions in a new way, and again opening up the space inside the implant, creating more surface area, all of these deliver really remarkable promises to the surgeon in terms of patient outcomes. So I this is why this area first attracted a lot of questions to our masterclass today, for sure.
yes.
But I think we are still in a mid course. We've been putting them into patients, they're working really well. And now we're finding that they're more versatile in some respects than the traditional manufactured product. You can there as that's why they've begun to migrate into other parts of the anatomy. So with all of that, let me let me ground this discussion. And we've talked about benefits, but I suppose if you're going to talk benefits, you might as well talk challenges too, right? So what are the
Definitely.
biggest challenges with this method of manufacturing from a very important perspective from a testing standpoint?
Thank you for that question. I think it is incredibly, in fact, I'm going to pull up a slide here because I want everybody to see these answers. There's many testing challenges. You have to think this is not conventional titanium implants where you get tight, repeatable data. Now, we're getting much better at it, obviously. How far are we out? 10 years out? When we started testing, we were one of the first company to test these printed devices. And the failure modes, understanding the failure modes, very different than machine repeatable implants. You've got roughened surfaces on the titanium, especially when they first came out, they were doing EBM and laser, but those roughened surfaces weren't as perfected at that point, and trying to identify cracking. So as you all know, for interbody cages, we run static and dynamic compression, compression shear, torsion. Well, you have to inspect, and we always did. Every implant was inspected prior to testing, whether it was printed or not. But printed in particular, because of those surfaces, you need to understand, is there going to be a crack that propagates? And how do I know? And sometimes if the printing, especially back then, was really rough, it was hard to tell if it was a crack, if it was there, did it propagate, if they coated it in any way. So that was an incredible challenge. And not knowing that, and then seeing it fail, and it might fail catastrophically at one point where you're saying, oh, okay, you know, what started it? What was the cause? And that's important when you're looking at these failing modes. You have to understand what caused this. That brings me to my second point. And I always discuss this because folks will say, oh, well, it failed. But did it fail in a way that was really related to the device, or is it from your test setup? Always, 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 with the engineers we teach, assess your test setup. For instance, rough surfaces, you can point load that implant. Because your surfaces are not all at one specific amplitude that's repeatable. There's macro, micro, and nano texture to this. And we put these per the standard in Delrin inserts. You test them statically, but then you'd use Delrin. Well, Delrin's still pretty hard. It's harder than bone. And so that if your inserts to hold them in the test machine, those are the gripping fixtures, are not fitted properly, or you've got what we call the point loading from the surface texture, you can get an early catastrophic dynamic failure. And you really need to understand that. It may not be related to the device, and that's not fair. And understand, is it a point load? Let's try this again. Let's make sure we're assessing our system so that it's not an artifactual failure, because it's something that you think this probably won't happen in human bone because it's much softer, much less stiff than that of Delrin. Identifying those can be very challenging. the lattices, and a lot of folks had asked about lattice structures and ideal lattice structures. You have to be able to test them. How do we test them? Well, often you create the model, you validate that model through actual testing and put it back into your model and run an FEA, see how the stresses are distributed. Because what will happen is folks in the early days were just printing lattices, and everyone's heard me talk about this. Oh, I've got this strong rim around it. I'm just going to put this lattice in here. It looks good, but we can't model it. And I thought, yeah, that's not a good thing, because
Mhm.
when that lattice breaks, in many cases, they failed like a domino effect. It was catastrophic. And it was like taking a saltine cracker with respect to debris and just crumbling it up. So now you have particulate soup because your lattice has failed. You want to be able to understand your lattice, understand how that stress is distributed. A lot of folks ask about, well, what's the ideal lattice? It depends on your application and your objective, but being able to model that validated in a validated manner is incredibly important, so that you can distribute the stresses as you would see fit for your application and make sure you're not getting catastrophic failures on these structures.
For sure, for sure. Um, and of course, you were talking about some of the earlier designs. Certainly, that's today. It would seem to me some of the, particularly the manufacturers with the longest track records, who've now been in the market, 8, 10 years. A lot of those issues have been reasonably resolved. But what are you seeing, Lisa?
Definitely. And
Yep.
that's the exciting part, right? In the beginning, we're trying to understand the process itself. You're developing that process. If you're printing too fast, if it's too heated, you can get voids. And the aircraft industry faced all this decades ago
Mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
But that we've overcome those challenges through the manufacturing experts, where they've done their own verification and validation work. And you have to, there's an extremely high amount of quality assessments, like everything that you have to do, not only from our side where we were testing, but also from the manufacturing side and the processes and validating the powder, et cetera, that go into it. And so we've come so far there that I would say a lot of those challenges have been taken out of the equation through
Yep.
better processing.
Yep. Yep. And of course, additive manufacturing is very attractive to manufacturers. All the majors are doing it now by far. I don't even know if it's dominating their production yet for spinal implants, but it's certainly a major portion of their manufacturing. And one of the things that attracts them is that, frankly, the cost and production speeds of additive manufacturing uh, have, compare favorably to traditional manufacturing. In your view, Lisa, as you look at this, do you think those cost and production speeds are going to allow, basically replace most of traditional spinal implants?
I would say yes, certainly dominate,
That's
because
sort of a tentative, sounds like a tentative yes.
it's a tentative yes. Because again, we're still going to need conventional at some point, but it'll dominate not only spinal, probably most orthopedic
Yeah.
devices, because you can turn around printed parts fast. So, for instance, prototype testing is
Yeah.
so important before you
Okay.
test print your final implants. There's a lot of money on the table there because it's costly, but also time is money. So if you can
Mhm.
get these done and you're creating prototypes, you can get quick information from your tests and how you might have to refine your implant so that it performs better or meets your criteria, acceptance criteria. That's what's
Mhm.
really changed the market, I think,
Yeah.
because you're able
Yeah.
to have better turnaround time. A lot of companies are verticalizing this and bringing the printing in-house. And
Mhm.
for those that are bigger companies, it's obviously easier to do it because it is costly and there is a lot you need to do to qualify your manufacturing process, your printing part of it.
Well, for sure. And when I talk to manufacturers, I get long discussions over the types of machines they use. And some manufacturers say, we're better because we're using this kind of machine versus this other kind of machine. But I think the other area I wanted to jump in with you, and this is a question that came from our audience as well. Yes, these additive manufacturing products started out as titanium, but now we're looking at some new materials that seem to be coming into the additive manufacturing arena. So could you talk a bit about the new materials that can be used with additive manufacturing and their level of biocompatibility?
I would love to. I had this slide a while ago. I had given a talk on this. I've given a lot of talks on AM, but at the time they were actually printing polymeric, and we know Peak is printed. I know that there's one or two companies we had assessed and worked with one of them that have printed Peak parts, but they were also looking at printing ceramic parts, as well as the exciting part is resorbable structures, PLGs, which are tough because they can tend to be brittle material, the resorbables. And even things like tricalcium phosphate, they've done that printed where they're printing bone scaffolds for tissue engineering purposes, for instance. So there's a lot of new materials that they want to be able to print. They can certainly print all of the metals. I know they print cobalt chrome as well. With respect to what's on the market, I don't know currently who's printing their cobalt chrome. But again, the minute you start looking at new materials to print, the more verification validation work you have to do from all sides, from your manufacturing processes, from your testing and assessment and your modeling. And that's where that might be a hindrance to some companies, maybe perhaps smaller companies. But it's very, very, very important to do that because you can't just assume, hey, I'm going to use the same lattice structure and design and dimensions I use for titanium and apply it to Peak. Why? Because Peak is a
Absolutely.
different
You can,
material. Yeah, you
exactly.
can't. Different mechanical properties. And you have to respect that.
Well, okay, just try 3D printing Peak in a titanium printer. Just that'll be
Oh,
that'll be the end of that printer, by the way.
oh,
Uh,
exactly. Exactly. You can't
uh,
mix. I mean, it's costly
no,
because you've got to clean the machines every single time. And
well, it's yeah, it simply is cannot be done. However, with the different materials, certainly with titanium, look at all the different designs. Again, the lattice, the curves, the whole bit, just boom, what an explosion. Peak hasn't had quite that level of explosion in terms of what you can do with Peak. But I have to say, I was really impressed with Bill Walsh's work. He took a titanium additive manufactured titanium implant and an additive manufactured Peak implant, same basic design, and did a test to see was there much difference. And he didn't find any statistically significant difference in terms of performance, Peak AM versus titanium AM, which is very interesting because now you opened up some interesting new questions. So, would you go with titanium? Would you go with Peak? Would you go with whatever? What are the other features and benefits that come through?
that,
Let me ask you this. You go ahead, Lisa.
oh no, I was
Any
gonna say
comments?
that's a
Yes.
great question because it's also, I'm gonna say patient specific, not patient matched, but okay, Peak's great because you can image it. And if you print it, now you can see the bone ingrowth. But you can kind of see that with titanium implants. You're not getting the same artifact you did with bulk titanium, obviously. But
Yeah.
Peak, you're gonna be able to image it, it'll be radiolucent. But I'm cautioning everybody, you have to understand the mechanics, the application of the mechanics. If you're putting it in, and right now you can't make the claim that they're using osteoporosis because it's not, you have to do large studies for it. But you need to assess it for its mechanical integrity. Is it going to hold up? It may hold up in
Mhm.
compromised bone, but it may not hold up, obviously, in hip, long bone. It may not,
Mhm.
unless you design it to be stronger. But you can design titanium to perform like Peak as well when you're talking about the open structures and elastic modulus.
Absolutely. Well, and I think titanium has a little bit more open structure than Peak. You know,
Yes,
yeah. And
certainly. because it'll be stronger that way than PEEK would be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of our questions that came in was, how would you quantify the benefits of these various 3D printed textures in terms of surface energy? Now that's an insider kind of question, but it's interesting.
That is, and I've looked at the surface energy, and for our audience, just to explain it at a real high level, it's the excess energy at a material surface. So that, and it's related to cell adhesion. The higher your surface energy, it attracts the cells. You get better adhesion, you get a stronger bond versus low surface energy where it repels. Okay, so what does that mean and how are you going to know? Well, we use well, go back to the charges, excuse me. When you have a rough structure, these structures create charges at the surface and they can attract different types of cells. Again, it depends on the charges, it depends on the shape and the peak, etc. But let's use osteoblasts for obvious reasons, where positively charged surfaces will influence the cell proliferation and spread of those osteoblasts. The sharper the peak in titanium, the more dense your positive charges are, as you can see in figure A, at that peak. So you're going to get greater attraction to those osteoblasts. And where you've got maximum peak valley distances, those cells will actually grow on the peaks of that surface. I do caution you, because too sharp of a peak, like everything, can actually create a reverse effect where you'll get the negative. So it's that optimal sharp peak that will attract the osteoblasts. You don't want to go too sharp. And so what does that mean, right? And how does it work with respect to micro versus nano? And I have I have a slide I can show you.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Why don't you?
Well, it'll take
Yeah.
me back to how are you going to measure it first? Wettability is the test. It's very common. It's very easy for the most part. You're just looking at that contact angle of a drop of liquid, drop of water on that surface. And we've looked at it for peak surfaces and titanium surfaces of different roughnesses. And you really kind of want to be between a 10 and 90-degree angle here. This is the perfect contact angle you would want to see for good adhesion, cellular adhesion, optimal surface energy, basically.
Interesting. That is really, I didn't know that. Well, actually, we had a question about, I don't even know what is bioresonance, and does 3D printing create bioresonance inside the material? And if we go there, are we going into nanomechanics now?
It's not, yeah, I saw the bioresonance. Bioresonance is a method of, it's an energy treatment that processes the electromagnetic information from the human body. And I thought, well, this isn't electromagnetic, and surface energy isn't electromagnetic per se. Nanomechanics is different from bioresonance, and I don't know, I'm not quite sure how they're referring to bioresonance. So I took it as, now let's talk about the nanomechanics then.
Mhm.
Yes, there are nanomechanics. In fact, I'm gonna take you to this slide. We're gonna get to this, but we talk about macro, micro, nano. Macro is tissue size, microcellular size, nano is molecular size. So everybody thinks, oh, nano, that we've got to go nano. Just because it's sexy, you don't go there. I mean, we're sexy, but but besides
Speak
that,
for yourself. I don't know. I'm
but
but
it's sexy.
I know what you're saying. I understand. Yes.
But you don't throw it out there just because it sounds good. You have to understand, microscopic cellular size 10 to the -6, nano molecular 10 to the -9. But studies have shown, and this is one by Saluda, and I thought this was very interesting because we've done a lot of work. I remember when I was at the Cleveland Clinic as well, where we're looking at programmed cell growth on different surfaces, nano and micro. And this study looked at surface roughness. Now we talk about surface energy, and just because it's rough, you're going to increase the surface energy. But now we're distinguishing between micro and nano. And so the micro roughness, as you can see in Saruta's study, looked at a roughness between 100 nanometers and 100 micrometers. And he found a very positive effect on cell adhesion, which is what you want. That's the goal. And you measure your cell adhesion by wettability testing, contact angle. So he looked at this and found that it had the strongest bond integrity, as you can see in, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving, in the detached cells percentage. Can you see it moving? Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
And
Yep.
when you look
Go
at the
ahead.
micro rough, which is in black, it has
Mhm.
the lowest percentage of detached cells, which means it has a very strong bond integrity for that cell adhesion.
Okay.
And it had moderate, well, compared to the machine, which, as you can see in machine, is kind of a roughened groove from the equipment, basically. But it had a moderate calcium deposition, better than machined, obviously. When you get to nano roughness, less than 100 nanometers, that's closer to the tissue morphology from a molecular perspective. It doesn't have a very strong mechanical, interfacial mechanical locking bond, as you can see here. I mean, it's less than the machine, but much greater loss of or greater detached cells than that of the micro. But what you do see here is you have better calcium deposition. So you're getting that cell adhesion and proliferation here. You just don't have as strong a cell adhesion bond as the micro. So perhaps they talk about mixing your surfaces with micro and nano. Again, it's application specific. What are you looking to do with that surface? If you're talking osteoblasts, micro may be enough because they're cellular in size.
That's right. That's right. No, absolutely. And that's the whole point, is to make this more tissue friendly, to put it
Exactly.
in lay terms. Uh, Material or metal debris. Certainly you think in terms of additive manufacturing, you're building it up from the bottom, you're doing these tiny little structures. Should there be more concern about metal debris, do you think?
So I'm always going to say there's always concern with
Mhm.
anything metallic in our body as metal debris. But a lot of testing has been done on the current certified manufacturers, for instance. They have specific lattices and surface roughnesses that they use. When companies have developed implants, one of the questions that the FDA will come back with is, we need to know what your particulate is, not just how much. Give us a whole characterization, because sizing and shape are just as important with respect to how a body, how tissue will respond positively or negatively. Obviously, too much debris is bad, but too much debris, even if it's small and nano-sized, which we have data
Mhm.
on, but not a lot of data, too much of that can be bad as well. So people are like, yeah, but it's nano, it's
Hmm.
okay, it's really small. Yeah, but
Ah,
if you have a lot of it, it's still detrimental
you bet.
to your body.
You bet.
But
No,
we are measuring for that. We do a lot of work always characterizing that particulate, and a lot of these structures are they don't have a lot of shed. And again, looking at the nano part is a newer technology. There are companies that can assess nanoparticulate now. And I encourage companies always to do that if they've got metal implants, to understand their nano profiles.
and again, that your comments, of course, the vast majority of these implants are titanium based, of course, but Peak is coming on pretty strong. And do your comments change at all when now we're going to consider Peak, or are they same for whether material is Peak or titanium
That's a
or
fantastic question.
cobalt chrome? Yes.
Yeah, cobalt chrome, definitely you need to assess your particular.
For
I'm going to
sure.
tell you that across the board. Peak as well, because peak, again, oh, peak is an art. Well, is anything foreign in your body really inert? No, your body will accommodate. It may just put a capsule around it and say, oh, we're all right with that, but it's still there.
Mhm.
And peak with these surfaces, the roughened surfaces, the porosities, you can have shed. They'll show up as carbon in your profile, so you have to understand what you're looking at, and there's ways to distinguish that as well and quantify it. Make sure you're not getting a lot of breakage because those particles can migrate, whether it's peak or titanium or
Okay.
cobalt chrome, or they still can migrate, and understand that. Make sure you've got it documented, make sure you've looked at it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. One of the things that really fascinated me about these designs is how their stiffness is not just different, it's qualitatively different, but it's of a kind different as well. I did a long article about the effect of Wolff's Law with respect to some of these designs. So can you talk a little bit about what the actual device stiffness potential is for these additive manufactured implants?
Oh, definitely. Wonder if I have, I probably have a slide for it, right? Yeah, I
There's a
do.
slide for that.
I
There's
do.
a
I
slide
have
for
a
that.
slide.
I have a slide. I love it. Yes.
Um, because again, when additive manufacturing first came out, folks, surgeons, or their first thought was, oh, no, 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 we don't want titanium. We know it subsides. No. And what folks weren't understanding is that's the bulk material. It has a high elastic modulus, meaning it's very stiff, of a cube of solid titanium. But we're not dealing with cubes of metal anymore. We're taking that metal, we're building structures. So now we're looking at what we call the effective modulus of the structure. And that structure can be programmed, can be tuned to have very different modula. Even within its one implant, you can have regions of different moduli, which is the beauty behind it. Now we're getting to that next level of real finesse with those patient-specific implants. We can design these structures. So when you look at the three below, it's all the same titanium. They're all printed, but you can see there's three different open architecture areas. And they perform very differently from each other. Why? Because we're looking at a structure that, yeah, it's titanium, but it's open. We can have strain or displacements in these little struts so that you'll get more motion microscopically, obviously. And it will, when tested, actually show to be less stiff, perhaps, than even peak. But as you can see here, depending on how large that porosity is, you can be lower than peak, you can be slightly greater than peak versus conventional bulk titanium alloy, as you see here. And you're even less than cortical bone. You can get closer to cancellous bone. Now, I'm going to caution everybody. Folks are coming out with implants that have a lattice structure that looks like trabecular bone and making that claim. And that's fine if they prove that it is,
There
but
you go.
trabecular bone, cancellous bone, anisotropic, meaning it's not uniform. Are you really mimicking bone? It's titanium. Are you really mimicking bone? Does your structure do that? So just because it looks like trabecular bone, does it perform like trabecular bone? Or would you rather have it perform, i.e. form and function like trabecular bone, even if it doesn't look like it? Ask yourself that when you're thinking about those designs.
Well, and you know, you can see how the design engineers with these new capabilities come up with all kinds of magnificent, creative ideas. The key question somebody's got to ask is, are these differences with a distinction or without a distinction? So we're going to do these different designs, but when they're in the patient, are we delivering some benefit that really relates to outcomes or safety or something like that? Um, in
Well
your
said.
opinion, I, difference without a distinction. I listen. I'm the I'm a big fan of design. I love it. But, at the end of the day, you have to provably show that it moves the ball forward for the patient.
I
Um,
agree.
so we've got this is an interesting question. Which attribute is more important for an interbody device? Would we be on team stiffness or would we be on team surface when it comes to contact with the end plates?
Can't you have both? Um, I want both.
Uh-huh.
Um, with respect to the end plates,
Yeah.
what is your need? First, think about your need. We know that the weakest part of an end plate is in the centrum, in the middle, and strongest on the ends. And it is viscoelastic, meaning it'll move just like tissue, soft tissue, but with less motion, obviously, because it's hard tissue. So stiffness, surface, and footprint. Footprint,
There you
the
go.
larger your
That's right.
footprint, the
Yeah.
better the distribution of your stress over a larger area so that you minimize the risk of stress risers. Stress
Mhm.
risers that the weakest link will fail, i.e. the end plate in subsidence. It could puncture through. When you think about stiffness, if it's too stiff, even if you've got a big footprint, too stiff, you could increase your risk to subsidence. I think that those are probably two of the more important concepts. But having that open porosity for bone ingrowth at the end plate isn't just as important. Surface roughness, great. I think surface roughness is ideal because the cells like it. However, you've got an open structure, you've got a nice footprint, you've got an ideal stiffness, you've already got probably, you've
Yeah.
got a good playing field to get started, and surface structure is just kind of the icing on the cake.
And surface structure can also mean more surface area as well. So that also is
Oh, it
is a
does.
positive. And I think
Exactly.
you're really making the case that it's a combination of things. It's multifactorial, really. And these additive
It is.
designs, they give us a lot more to work with. So
Exactly.
as you've looked at the literature, as you've sort of tracked all this, have you reached any kind of opinions about what really matters with these additive designs? And I know we just talked about it's a multifactorial, problem, but in your opinion, what would be most impactful to help ensure faster, better fusion?
Well, actually, I always talk
Oh, we have
about,
a slide for that? All
isn't that
right.
shocking? But I love this. This was one of my favorite
Yeah.
topics to discuss because we've spent so many years looking at it. I've spent so much time not only testing the different structures, assessing it even from the cellular level, but even lecturing on it and getting a lot of clinical feedback. And that's what I loved about it, because our biggest issue is we want to be able to fuse early. So that healing time is really, really important. If it takes too long, if it's delayed, you just significantly increase your risk to failure. You want to be able to get in there, get it stabilized, reduce your micromotion at that vertebral end plate implant, and improve your interface mechanics so that you get osseointegration. And that kind of is the cycle. I know many people have seen this, where we talk about surgical implantation, earlier osteoingrowth. If you're getting earlier osteoingrowth from multiple planes of entry in your printed device, then you've got fingers in a chain link fence. You're holding on all 5 fingers of each hand into different areas of that chain link fence over a greater area. You've got better stability than taking your pinky of each hand and holding one little chain link. That's going to be much less stable. So you get earlier osteoingrowth from multiple planes, better bone capture, better stability at that interface for more bone to come in and continue to grow and remodel for better, faster fusion.
So we're getting near the end of our session. I'm going to close with two questions, more forward-looking. And and by the way, this has been one of our best discussions. I've just enjoyed this tremendously. How do
Me
you
too.
think how do you think this really innovative move into additive manufacturing will affect spine surgery over the next 5 years?
Well, there's going to be a few things. Everybody's talking about patient matched. And again, remember, just because it looks like the tissue doesn't mean it'll function like the tissue. But when we get there, there are things with patient match that'll really help. For instance, large sections of bone that may need to be removed, you can now print to the patient's anatomy for support. You can start to tune to match the patient's bone quality. Again, we often see cases where they try to put cages in and fix a spine so that you take a 65-year-old spine and make it look like it's 25. The body doesn't want to do that. It adapts for a reason. And it's kind of the same a bit with the patient match. But with that said, we may actually have, and we do currently have medical facilities, hospitals that are actually printing in-house. Now, why hasn't everyone done that? Because it is a lot of money and qualification and equipment to be able to do that. The part that is worrisome is that just having the surgeon go, well, I'm just going to print my own implant. Well, you've got to understand the mechanics. You've got to understand how it's going to fail. Just because you print it doesn't mean it's going to work. You have to understand not only the mechanics of your implant, but that biomechanical environment and what it's going to take. But I think the manufacturers that are printing now can actually help, and the design engineers, like ourselves, can actually help those facilities with certain lattices, structures. This will work. It's been proven. Now this is what you need to do for your patient specific. So that's what I think is going to change that spine surgery, where there is going to be in-house printing for faster turnaround time. Again, even things like sterilization and debris, they have to be assessed. Can you sterilize it? Is it going to be clean with all those nooks
Oh,
and crannies and crevices? That has to
that's
be
right.
proven. That's what we do now. And it's a lot of work. It's not something that you can just print and say, okay, we're good. Let's just put this in. And that'll be a large learning curve for those that are printing in-house too.
This is not easy stuff. And the
Exactly.
manufacturers that have brought this to market, it's been hundreds of thousands of hard hours to get this right. And
Exactly.
and there's a reason people, hire you and others to do the testing and to really make sure that these can work as promised, uh, again and again and again, with
Exactly.
absolute confidence in this material that you're implanting. This is a mission critical job you do, surgeons do, with their patients. You can't, no tolerance for failure, quite frankly. And
Exactly.
I and Lisa, I would expect this turns out to be more of a prototyping tool in a hospital rather than a eventual implant.
I would too. And I'm going to throw out multidisciplinary team. Think
Yep.
multidisciplinary team,
Yep.
because everyone has their own job to do. Especially if you're thinking about bringing printing in-house, and you
Yeah.
want that team, because you can't do everything. You don't know all of the ins and outs, but with your team, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, it is such a pleasure to do this with you, and thank you very much for what I think is going to be one of our very best master classes yet on additive manufacturing.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed this thoroughly. Always
Me too.
enjoy
Me
these
too. I
master
learn a
classes
lot.
with you.
And I think our audience learns a lot as well. So, if anyone has questions, you can email me, Robin at RY Ortho. I'll get them over to Lisa, Dr. Farrar, excuse me. And in addition, just so folks know, we are going to be doing a live masterclass at this coming NAS meeting in Chicago in September. So with that, thank you again, Lisa.